The last video I made was about the top 9 beginner gardening mistakes, and while I was filming that, I really got to thinking. Far too often, content creators get in front of the camera and we talk about the best things possible. I'm guilty of this too. And while I was making the video last week, I really started thinking about not just the mistakes that beginners make in the garden, but I started thinking about all the mistakes that I made myself this year. It's not often that you see the down and dirty side where things are dying, just like this tomatillo here. So let's jump right into the 9 mistakes that I myself have made this season and how I'm gonna fix them. These are all gonna be relatively big mistakes in my opinion. Biggest of which though is gonna be number 9, so I saved it for last. It's one that not a whole lot of people talk about, but it's definitely one that a lot of people struggle with. So stick around all the way through to the end, it's gonna be a good one. The first mistake I made this year was the layout of my garden. Now, my garden is 60 feet long by 20 feet wide, and normally what I do is I sit down in the fall or the winter, just like most gardeners do, and I plan out my garden for the following season. Instead of setting my garden up in nice little beds, or instead of doing nice long rows going the long ways, I thought it was a good idea to do 30 different rows going the short way across my garden. Now, what this did is it gave me a lot of extra work. When I laid out my water lines, I had to lay out 30 water lines instead of 4 or 5. On top of that, I didn't leave enough spacing in between my pepper plants specifically. So my pepper plants are all really close together. Right now we're in the beginning of August, and what happens here, at least in Utah, is as soon as we get into late August, into September, and even into October, everything in this section of the garden, all these peppers are just gonna explode. Grow really big, they're gonna put on a lot of peppers, and I am not gonna be able to get in here and harvest as soon as that time of the year comes. Next year I'm gonna be making a lot of changes here in the garden with the layout, how I'm gonna be setting everything up, and I'm gonna be talking about that in mistake number 7. Now, while we're on the subject of peppers here, mistake number 2 is growing so many peppers. It's not a secret that I'm kind of known for peppers. That's always what I've grown. That's kind of been my passion, is growing the hottest, most exotic peppers that I possibly can. Next year, that's gonna change. What you see here isn't even all the peppers I have. Right behind the camera, I've got more peppers. I've got another 100 peppers out in the front yard. In total, I'm growing roughly 180 to 200 peppers. I kind of lost count. My mentality with gardening has kind of shifted a little bit, mostly this season, really. Instead of just growing for the sport, for wanting to have the most crazy peppers, the hottest, most exotic peppers, I really want to start providing for my family. I don't plan on being able to grow 100% of our vegetables and fruits or anything like that, but if I could get to a point where we're growing 60, 70% of our produce at home in the garden and storing it throughout the year, that's my goal. Hey neighbor! Right now, 2/3 of this garden is only peppers. Some mistakes like this one are easy to fix. Next year I'm gonna grow, instead of 200 peppers, I'll probably grow 15 or 20 pepper plants, which is still gonna be more than anything else I grow. I still love my peppers, but just not 200 plants worth. Even though I get a little bummed every time I go to the garden and realize how much wasted space I have on the peppers this year, I'm still gonna enjoy my peppers while I have them. This one specifically is a piri piri. I got this from Chili Chump. If you don't know who Chili Chump is, go find him on YouTube. If you're into growing peppers, he's the guy you want to follow. Mistake number 3 is having no trellis system. This section of the garden right here is all vining plants. We've got watermelon, we've got a whole lot of cucumbers. My family really loves pickles. We've got some spaghetti squash over here. We just have a whole lot of vining plants, and this takes up about 1/3 of my garden space right now. My garden is 20 feet wide, like I said, and my watermelon plant is reaching from more or less one fence to the other. By the end of this season, there won't be a single space over here that is not covered in some kind of vining plant. And I could really utilize this space better if I was to have some trellises. Next year, I plan on doing a whole lot of arch trellises, utilizing the space in the garden better, especially my vertical space. Vertical space is probably the most underutilized space in the garden, and that definitely rings true for my garden. I don't have a single trellis in my garden, even though I don't want to admit that. I don't have a single trellis in my garden. Everything I grow is just on the ground. With the trellis system, you get better airflow, you save a whole lot of space, and overall you get healthier plants. So next year, I'm saving some space and I'm building some trellises. Mistake number 4 that I made this season is no succession planting. And if you don't know what succession planting is, there's a lot of plants that you harvest early on in the season, and then after that you can plant more plants that are also quick to harvest. So out of one little space, you can get 1, 2, 3 different crops all in the same season. That's something that a lot of times you have to plan in the early stages of your garden planning for the season, and for some reason I didn't plant any at all for my garden. I do have some broccoli and cauliflower back here that I've already harvested, and I really would like to plant something else, but the way my garden's laid out, it's kind of hard to do that. I don't really have any ideal space for succession planting. My tomatoes and my peppers and everything, they're all season long. I'll be able to harvest from those all the way up until the frost. I don't really have the room or the layout to be planting more things halfway through the season. So next year, I'm 100% gonna be putting that into my garden plan, And there's a lot of programs out there that can kind of help you with succession planting and kind of help you with companion planting and what can go where and all sorts of things like that. And I'm gonna be using one this year from GrowVeg. GrowVeg.com I think is what it is. Either way, I'll leave a link in the description below. I'm not affiliated with them at all. I've never used it before. I just saw some YouTube videos and I really think I wanna use it. But what it'll do is it'll break down every square foot of your garden, and you can kind of put the plants, you know, in the little animated thing. You can put the plants in your garden, set everything up, but then if you want a succession plant, it's also gonna tell you when you should be harvesting your plants, when you should be starting your seeds for your next plants, when you should be planting the next plants, and it kind of just does a lot of the work for you. I think it's something like $30 a year, but to me that's worth it. I'll be using that next season. So if you've never seen a garden planner and you kind of have some struggles planning out your garden, go check that one out. Mistake number 5 was not having a tomato trellis system. And now this isn't just a normal trellis system. I wanted one specifically for my tomatoes. Last year I kind of struggled with tomatoes because I planted about 30 of them and I didn't trim them. I didn't do anything with them. I just let them grow. I did have tomato cages and that helped a little bit, but by the end of the season, we literally couldn't even harvest our tomatoes because it was so dense. Seriously, these things were monsters. So this year I really wanted to try out growing tomatoes in a single vine, because they're vining plants and a lot of people do grow them in a single vine and it works out really well for them. So I started doing that, growing them in a single vine. I had some nice stakes, and in my head I was like, I'm gonna build a trellis system next week, it'll be fine. Okay, maybe next week. And then before I knew it, my tomatoes were outgrowing their little stakes that I had for them. And by that time, I didn't have the time or the money to be building a whole trellis system. And so I went out to Lowe's and I bought like $2 pieces of wood that I could stake into the ground and let these tomatoes grow up. So I'm really happy with the single vine for the tomato plants. It's super awesome, and if you're interested in learning about that, leave a comment down below and I'll talk all about it. But what I'm not happy with is when you're growing in a single vine, you can grow them a lot closer together, and I didn't do that. I still kept them really far apart. So in my tomato area, which is right here behind me, you can kind of see it. In my tomato area, they're really spread far out apart. They don't grow into each other at all, and I really could bring them closer together. Either way, this is a failure on my part to really plan for what the tomatoes are going to do this season, and next year I won't make that mistake again. Number 6 is mulch, or lack thereof in the backyard garden at least. Last year was kind of a mess. We didn't put any mulch down, we didn't put any weed barrier down, we didn't do anything, and we spent the whole season weeding the garden. We spent so much more time weeding the garden than we did actually harvesting the garden. It was miserable. So this year I wanted to make sure I had no weeds, and I succeeded in that, but it's still not what I wanted. If you've seen any of my recent videos, I put weed barrier down in the garden this season, and it's done its job. I haven't had any weeds, I haven't had to weed, I haven't had to do any extra work there. But I want to start having a more organic garden, and having this weed barrier just kind of feels counterintuitive to that. What I want to do next year is in all the walkways, everywhere that I don't want weeds, I want to do a thick layer of mulch, because what will happen is after that mulch starts to break down, it's going to add nutrients back into the soil. On top of that, weeds won't be growing through it very well, and if they do, I'll pick the few weeds that I get. If you don't care about being organic or anything like that, this stuff really is awesome, and I made a video on it. I will put that video right here, and I'll also put it down in the description below. The number 7 mistake I made was planting in the ground. Planting in the ground isn't a bad thing. It works for a lot of people. It is the cheaper way to go. A lot of times you have really healthy ground soil, so you want to use the ground soil. And for especially a lot of beginning gardeners, it's the faster way to get into gardening. I'm a pretty young guy, but my back still hurts from when I put the plants in the ground months ago. What I want for next season is I want a full garden of raised beds. 10 raised beds, all of them are gonna be 8 feet by 4 feet, 2 rows of 5 going all the way down my garden. I'm gonna have a 4-foot walkway all the way down the middle of them, 3-foot walkways on each side, and 3 feet in between each bed. This is gonna make it easier for me to get in and work around the garden. This is gonna keep it more organized. I'm gonna be able to build trellises in between the 2 garden beds, so that way I can grow my vining plants instead of having them take up a giant portion of the garden. I'll kind of have an arched trellis in between the beds, so that way the plants are growing up in between the 2 beds, and I'm utilizing that vertical space, and honestly space that isn't really even in a garden bed. I'm excited. If you're getting value from this video, give it a big mistake-free thumbs up and then share it with all your friends. It really helps our channel out a lot, and I appreciate it. Mistake number 8 that I made this year is not preparing the soil properly. Preparing the soil properly. Every year I put a layer of compost over my garden to help prepare that soil for the next season. Well, this year I was so excited about growing a giant pumpkin, but I had nowhere to grow it. My garden was full and I didn't really want to take that much space inside my garden. So what I did was take this weird grassy area in my front yard and I quickly tilled it really fast, and then I kind of mounded up some dirt and I put my pumpkin in there and I just assumed it would grow. I should have known better. I should have spent the time on preparing that soil because the pumpkin didn't grow. It grew for a minute and then it just kind of tapered off and died. My house has been here since the 50s. The soil there is just as old. It's been growing grass for decades and decades. What I should have done is mixed in some compost, some organic fertilizers, and really gotten that soil to a point that it was able to grow a giant pumpkin. I had a competition going with my friends and I definitely lost that. I was the first one to lose the competition. I'm the one with a gardening channel and I was the first one to lose that competition. I think I took on too much this season. I had so many good ideas I wanted to do, but I waited until the last second to do them, and the pumpkin was like the really last thing. And so I was just in a hurry to get it in the ground, and really I should have just, if I'm not gonna give it 100%, I shouldn't do it at all. Going back to the raised beds, I'm gonna jump back here for a second. Going back to the raised beds, instead of putting compost over my entire 1,000 square foot garden, I'll be able to just put compost in the raised beds, which is gonna be nice. That's gonna save a lot of time, a lot of money, and I'm super excited about that. And that goes along with preparing the soil. Always make sure your soil is healthy and ready to be planted in. Don't just find some dirt and throw a plant in it and assume that it's gonna grow, because it most likely won't. Till in some compost, mix in some organic fertilizers, mix in, if you don't wanna do organic, just mix in some normal fertilizers. Either way, put some nutrients into the soil, put some good organic material as far as compost into your soil just to give it some structure, and then you'll be ready to start planting. Last, but probably most importantly, is number 9, thinking I had it right. I spent probably 100+ hours planning this garden. I had everything pictured in my head perfectly. I had it on paper. I had every plant where it was gonna go. And I really thought I put the work in and did everything I was supposed to do to have the perfect season. But let me tell you a little secret that every gardener has. Every single year, we all think we get it right. Every year we plan it and we think we have everything exactly how it should be. But every single year, we're all wrong. Every single year, there's going to be something that you find that you can do better next year. No amount of planning is really gonna stand up to an actual gardening season, to putting the plants in the ground and setting up your garden and dealing with the wind and the extreme heat for 2 months straight. But what you can do is learn from your mistakes, just like I have this season. When I made the video last week and I was talking about beginner gardening mistakes, most of the time I was thinking about my own mistakes, the teachings that I'm bringing from this season, and the things that I'm gonna do better next season. And that's kind of what spurred this video. No matter how good of a gardener you are, you're going to make mistakes, but you will always be improving season after season. So if you are a beginner gardener, start gardening. Get some plants in the ground, get them in containers, get them wherever you need to get them, get some plants in the ground. You don't have to be perfect. Get started so you can start learning. Even with all these changes I'm gonna make, next year isn't gonna be perfect. Next year I'm gonna make more mistakes, and then the following year after that is gonna be even better. These are all mistakes that I personally made myself this season, but if you wanna see the video I'm talking about from last week where I talk about the 9 beginner mistakes, watch this video right here. There's some really good stuff in there, some really important stuff in there, and I know you'll enjoy it. I'll see you there.